We're going to be kind of focusing on just one verse, but I'm going to give a little background to it. But it's going to be Romans 1:16. And with that, I'm going to start off in verse 8 reading, just to give a little kind of where it's coming from. So, Romans 1:8. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed in all the world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I mention you, always in my prayers, asking that somehow, by God's will, I may now at least succeed in coming to you. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. That is, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that I have often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. I am under obligation both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. So I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Romans 1:16. I'm sorry, I read out the ESV, and so a lot of those words are a little different. Okay, so essentially what Paul's doing here with verses 8 through 15 is just kind of giving a little thanksgiving. He likes to do this in his letters, for example, Corinthians and Philippians. He does this at the beginning of the books just to kind of give a little thanks for the city that he's mentioning in regards to that specific letter. But this was a really important city for Paul. He was longing for Rome. He wanted to go to Rome, and his time finally came. And this was important because he was called to the Gentiles. And Rome was essentially the hub or the Mecca during this time period for Gentiles. There were very few Jews and believers there in Rome. And so that was his driving place of like, I need to get to Rome. So he was also eager to preach. I believe that's the last line in verse, it's in verse 15. So I'm eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. And it just really made me think, like, when was the last time I was eager to share something with an unbeliever? I was eager to go tell someone about the gospel. Yeah, we're told this all the time, but at the same time, like, the eagerness, I believe that word, when I read the word eager, it stood out to me more than him just wanting to go do this. He had an eagerness, he had a passion for going to do this, to share the gospel with these unbelievers in Rome. And this was another major step for him to fulfill God's calling on his life, which was to preach the good news to the Gentiles. And so this kind of brought up a little bit of a situation that I kind of related with in regards to my trip to Seattle when I first came on with you guys. So it was just one of those things where I understand like an eagerness to go somewhere, and then also get that major step in regards to calling for God's fulfillment of what he was telling you to do. I mean, there's a reason God told me and put a passion of Seattle on my heart, but I don't know what it is yet, but we're going to get there. So now to kind of just focus more on verse 16 alone. So essentially I'm going to just say parts of the verse, and then I'm going to kind of break down just certain things about it. So the first one is, it starts off for I. Here, Paul is resembling I, but as Christians, we need to insert ourselves, like our names and our plans and our thoughts into that word I. Paul was not writing this just for himself. He was writing it for everybody and also for the Romans. So it's for Bobby, is not ashamed of the gospel. For Don is not ashamed of the gospel. For Sharon's not ashamed. I mean, we need to insert ourselves into that. Because if we're not, then are we really being, unashamed for the gospel? Or are we just living our lives, coming to church on Sundays and Wednesdays and doing nothing else during the week? We need to live ourselves unashamedly. And so that's one thing I like to do anyway, is to put my own name in certain verses. And so it just directly applies to me, and I hear it in my head. Bobby is unashamed of the gospel. Not for I referencing Paul, but Bobby. This was written it's a love letter to me. I need to read it in that way. Also, in regards to Romans, Christians in Rome, one, they wouldn't really even be Christians. They're called Christians. They're more believers of Jesus at the time, possibly Jews who lived in Rome, those kind of things. They were living kind of ashamed lives. Like, they weren't being vocal about what they believed. They would hide it. They wouldn't try to be upfront and be honest about who they were and what they believed. And so this was also a direct shot to those people that Paul either experienced or he just felt God telling them, like, these people are here that are living ashamed in this area of ungodliness. But the aspect of not being ashamed, what does that kind of really mean? Not being ashamed of something. In the Greek, it literally just means I am ashamed of, and it has the pre aspect of saying it's not. So it's I am not ashamed of. But in the English, I love this definition. I didn't know what this definition was because I just thought of unashamed. I know what that means. Not necessarily like digging into what it was. But it was embarrassed or guilty because of one or our actions, really, characteristics or associations. And so I was like, that covers everything about a person. Your actions, your characteristics, and your associations. Like, even if you're not doing something, things you're associated with, you can still be ashamed for, which was just kind of catching to me. But what would living unashamed kind of look like? Would that just be being upfront, having good character, so on and so forth? Or is it more of something? Is it like deeper than that of just being outwardly upfront? Okay, so what I'm about to say is not trying to change the topic about Romans 1:16 or anything, just to kind of put some thoughts into your head. So, like tattoos, piercing, music, and art, those topics, people sometimes have bad views on them, and they can be used for things not of God. But one thing that people really don't think about is, can they be used for God? And this isn't in reference to the human, this is in reference to that specific thing. So you can see Christians who have tattoos all over their bodies, and they're like, yeah, when I was a kid, I was wild, I got tattooed, and they see that person for the person who it is. But when you see a Christian who then got tattoos, you're looking at the tattoos and saying, hey, why'd you get that? It says not to get that. Same thing with piercings and all that kind of stuff. Well, can those things like tattoos and piercings and music and art be used for God as a basis to live unashamed? Essentially placing a symbol on you or words on you that outwardly express all the time that this is what you believe enough to get permanently put on your body. And so some of you, probably Pastor Don and Sharon know, but I have 2 tattoos. And they are, one's on my wrist and one's on right here. And they're both Bible verses. And so one thing that I got brought up to from my mom when I started wanting tattoos is, well, it says not to do that. I was like, Mom, it says the same things about your ear piercings. So I don't want to hear it. And there's other reasons and things like that. But one thing that really kind of pushed her to that point of like, okay, I think it's okay if you get a tattoo, was the reason why I wanted to get it. I wanted to get tattoos because it's permanently on me forever. So, and what I wanted with that was Bible verses, representing my faith, representing what God's done in my life through different things and different situations in regards to permanently being on me. And so my wrist one is Philippians 4:13, and that was my life verse since I was 12 years old when my dad left our family for drugs, and then I lived my whole junior high life without my dad, and then he came back into our life when I was in high school and clean and all that fun stuff, and so we got to reignite that family, which never happens. But that's kind of what helped me through. Like, I can do anything through Christ who strengthens me. And with this new one I got is go therefore and make disciples of all nations. And so with those two verses, they have very strong and specific meanings for me. And also they bring up conversations all the time. So I do this ministry through my home church, and DBU does it as well, but it's called Beach Reach. It's essentially where we go down South Padre, which is a huge spring break destination, and we go during spring break. And we're giving rides to all the drunk kids and partiers around the island for free. We ride them around these vans that we paint and decorate and all that. It's fun. It's a great experience. But I can't tell you how many people I saw there that were partying and getting drunk that had the same tattoo that I had. Not necessarily in the same spot or the same way. Of mine says he strengthens me, and then Philippians 4:13. One guy had a back tattoo of like big Philippians 4:13. I'm like, hey, I have that tattoo too. What does that mean to you? And he couldn't tell me. And another one had it written on his ribs, like the whole verse actually written out. And then he didn't really know what it meant to him either. And so it was one of those things that I got to create that conversation because I had a matching tattoo. Yeah, it's viewed as something that's like, hey, don't do that to your body. Your body's a temple. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm writing Bible verses on my wall. And that's something that I've been all about ever since. I really recently kind of only want to tattoo Bible verses on me, just in different languages. And I used to want different symbols, like I wanted a cross here and all that kind of stuff. But I've recently just been like, hey, I'm going to get it in different languages, only certain verses that matter to me for a specific reason, and also to create conversation. When someone asks me, hey, what does that tattoo mean? I can tell them. Because it's in a different language, they're going to ask what it means. Anytime you see a Chinese tattoo, you're like, I wonder what that means. And if the person's able to tell you what it is, if mine's a Bible verse, then I'm going to be able to share the gospel with them right then and there because my tattoo's in a different language and they don't know how to read it. So that's just that little part. But that's in reason for living unashamed of the gospel, though. That's one way that I'm trying to do that on a daily basis. And so if I'm walking around campus or just walking around in Dallas or something, those things are a billboard without me saying anything to them. If I walk by somebody and I'm wearing a tank top and you can see my Greek tattoo, then they may not be able to read it, but if they ask me about it, I can tell them. If they see me looking at my watch and see my wrist one, that one's obviously a little more obvious because it's in English, but it's a resemblance of what is in my heart just outwardly on my body without me saying anything. This is the same with music, and there's actually like an unashamed movement going around in Christian hip hop, and the biggest player in this is the 116 Click, which they take it from this verse essentially. But it's just living unashamedly and being upfront with your music, what it is, all that kind of stuff. But it's just that aspect in that mental thinking of, I want to be unashamed. Everything I do, everything I'm associated with, my characteristics and my actions need to be unashamed for the gospel. Because if they're not, then what are they doing there? I'm being ashamed of the gospel if I'm not out there proclaiming it and telling others about it. Not doing something is essentially taking on the aspect of you being ashamed of it because you're not doing it. So if I'm not talking about Jesus to my friends, that means I'm ashamed to talk about Jesus with them. Because why would not? I mean, he's the savior of the world. He saved me from Mormonism and pride and disrespecting of women and all this kind of stuff. Why wouldn't I want to share that with somebody? If I'm not, there's a reason. I would feel embarrassed or I feel guilty or something like that. Okay, so that was that little side tangent. So the next kind of little part is, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone. This essentially states it isn't about us. It's all in God's hands. There's nothing better or worse we could do from that situation. God uses our conversations, our actions, and they're all for Him. Sometimes they're good and, it resembles Him in that way, and sometimes they're not so good, and He uses those as learning experiences for you or other people. But essentially everything you do, every word you say, should be resembling Christ, or if it's not, it'll possibly use for an example for yourself later. I should have done better there. Thank you, God, for showing me that situation of how I can better myself and better my walk with you. So then we continue on. And then it is to the Jew first and then to the Greek. What is this saying and kind of why is it significant? Paul is essentially pointing out the aspect of the chosenness of the Jews that's spread all throughout the gospel. But then he says, then to the Greek. This was a huge no-no, a huge taboo situation. This is not something that Jews like Paul would want or be associated with. Jesus was Christian. Christian essentially was a subsect of Judaism before it was even called Christians. There were Jews who believed in Jesus. And so they were very stingent about the aspect of we're Jewish. This is a Jewish idea. This is a Jewish thing. This is not meant for anybody else. And we know this and we have proof of this because of the argument that Paul and Peter had in regards to Peter wanting to keep it Jewish, and he wanted to circumcise the Gentiles and things like that to make them as Jewish as possible. And Paul had to kind of put Peter in his place and, point out to him, no, they're Gentiles. They need to stay Gentile. We're not going to, assimilate the gospel that much to them before we're changing physically who they are just so they meet our guidelines. The gospel's meant for everybody, not just us Jews, essentially is what Paul was kind of going for in that argument. And we also, I feel, at least me, is that we forget that Jesus was a Jew. He wasn't a Christian. Jesus was not a Christian because that wasn't a thing. That was later on. He represents what the subject of what Christians are trying to follow, but he was a Jew. He was 100% Jew, through and through, and I always forget that, and so it's nice to kind of be reminded about that aspect. And so I also know that kind of sounds a little like crazy when you say that Jesus wasn't a Christian, but essentially that's what it is. He was born into a Jewish family. He's a great-great-great-great-grandson of King David. All that aspect. He was completely Jewish. But essentially, through his life, we as Christians now have adopted his lifestyles and tried to resemble our life towards Christ, and the idea of Christianity came about in this point. But everything was Jewish. The people who believed in Jesus at that time, mainly Jewish. Jesus, the disciples, Paul, they were all Jews. And so most of the believers were in this kind of one little circle area region of the world. And that's all where the Jesus idea kind of was at that time. It was in this general area of the Mediterranean, Middle East area. And until Paul really started going out and mass spreading this gospel to other areas and regions, this was the first time it was getting seen by these Gentile people, not Jews. And I mean, it's one of those things of where, like, as Jews, they didn't even want, when they were with Jesus, the 12 disciples, they didn't even want to walk through Samaria to go to the town that they were going to, and that's when Jesus split off with them and talked with the Samaritan woman. And they wouldn't even, I believe it was they were wanted to have lunch or something, so they went actually back to town, a Jewish town, to have lunch to avoid going through Samaria. And it was one of those things of just Jesus showing cross-culturally of, hey, doesn't matter if they're Jewish or Greek, without him even saying it, that his actions were resembling that. Was, hey, I'm going to go hang out with this Gentile, Greek, pagan, whatever you want to call her, woman. That's all what we are, unless you have a little Jewish blood in you. Then that's what all we resemble when the Bible mentions those things. That's in the groups and lumps that we're sectioned in. He demonstrated that to us. And so it was very surprising to me, just kind of when I was reading through of how Peter and the other disciples didn't get this, but Paul did, who never walked with Jesus, never knew that conversation unless it was told to him. And so it just really showed of how God revealed that to him and it proved the fact that that's actually what he's about. He's about everybody, not just the Jews. The Jews first, fine, that's great, that's awesome, that's why they're God's chosen people, but also to the Greek. He didn't even change the level of equality. The Greeks and the Jews are on the same playing field. They all need Jesus. They all need the truth. And so just some different kind of areas to think about are, how are we as First Baptist Church Seagoville living our unashamed gospel to the people of Seagoville and then onto America. I do this kind of comparison because that's exactly what it was that Paul was doing. To the Jew, small regionalized area, then to the Greek, which was everybody else. To the Gentiles, to the pagans, to the barbarians. Essentially, that is the contrast that we're trying to build is, okay, here's Seagoville. That's where our church is located. How can we do things for Seagoville? Then also, while we're also thinking of this, how can we do things for the nation of the United States? Because we're called to both. We're not just called to only think about Seagoville. So that's why things in Rowlett, things in Garlandton, like, we're called to think about that stuff. When we have tragedies and terrorist attacks, like, we're called to pray and care for those people, sometimes go out and help. And so we need to understand as a church and a body of believers, yeah, we have a region, and now we have a little section of where we are focusing because that's where our permanent home is. But also at the same time, that doesn't restrict us from the aspect of there's nations and unreached people groups all over the world. Middle East, middle of Africa somewhere, in the forest of Nigeria that no one goes into except for witch doctors. Papua New Guinea, where my buddy has a family that's missionaries there. Like, there's so many unreached people still. And I mean, Paul was a perfect example of this, of just going to those areas of like, hey, there's no Christians here, let's go to them. And it was one of those things that he was upfront about who he was. I mean, he came in to different situations, like when he went to Athens, of where he went into the conversations of the people, the philosophers, and things of that nature, and had discussions with them. Not about his beliefs, not anything about that. He just talked with them first. Then he mentioned, oh, hey, you know that unnamed God you have over there? Yeah, let me tell you about who he is. And it was one of those things that he never hid the fact that that's what it was. He was getting to know them first. He was getting to know these people. He was going out to all these different areas and spawning different believing churches through people just believing in Christ because they heard it for the first time. It's not that these people had a chance to deny Christ and then God persistently was working on their heart. They never heard of it at all. Period. That's just how it was. And so in America and Seagoville and Texas generally, because of the Bible Belt, a lot of times you're going to come across people that have heard the Bible, either grown up in church or they know who Jesus is. But it doesn't change the fact that, yes, we're still called to those people, but we're also called to people that have never heard it at all. And so that essentially wraps it up. But this verse just personally has been a huge thing on my life in regards to just my daily walk. And so even my hidden areas of where no one sees me, I'm at my house by myself, it still needs to resemble my actions, my associations, and my character. It doesn't change where I'm at. It needs to be who I am consistently throughout who I am. And this verse is one of those that really pushes me and reminds me of, oh, hey, you remember when you said that? Yeah, that wasn't right. Or, hey, you did this, or you're doing this in regards so you will eventually have this conversation with somebody. You're going to, pay for the person's food behind you at Starbucks, and, eventually, if you're with somebody, that person 3 months from now, hey, why did you buy those meals at Starbucks behind you? Everything you do is for a reason and for a different conversation or a different situation later, whether it be for those people around you or just different situations that come about, because situations replicate and duplicate all throughout your life. I can tell you hundreds and hundreds of occasions of where I was doing something, daily something, going to this Starbucks at this time, and one day this one person was in there that I got to have a conversation with because there wasn't an open seat and I gave him mine. And, but I was in that same Starbucks every day for 2 years while I was going to school, and nothing ever happened. Why did I still go to that Starbucks? For that specific reason right there. And so it's just kind of a little reminder that I wish we could just have on a piece of paper right here on our foreheads, attached to it so we can see it at all times. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Oh snap! Well, I didn't just demonstrate that very well when I was driving and got mad at that person. Oh goodness! I just wish there was somehow we could see that on our glasses or something to be a good reminder that our actions, our characteristics, and our associations matter, and they are examples and ways that we can live unashamed for Christ and for what He represents in the gospel. This is the best story ever told, and when I say story, I'm not talking about a fable story. This is real life, and it's a love letter to us, and it's really hard to think about how many conversations that we missed with people because we weren't living unashamed for the gospel. And so I know when I was reflecting on this, and God kind of laid it on my heart to tell you guys, how many conversations, how many people have I missed that opportunity with because I was afraid because they were a Muslim. And now He's called me to Muslim people. So for example, I had a friend, Sam, at TCC. I had conversations every day with her about Christ, but I never got deep because I was if she even believes, she's going to be excommunicated from her family. She'll be kicked out. She can't, have those views and be living at her house. She's going to get kicked out. And so part of me, I was I'll talk to her when she moves out and has her own place. That's not me living unashamed for the gospel. And it really kicks my behind when I think about all those different situations of, what if I did that? What if I got deep with Sam and I was hey, Sam, this is what Jesus did for you. I know we talk about a lot of logistics of the Bible and the Quran, but this is what he did. And if you trust me as a human and like respect me, I'm not lying to you. And if I was upfront and honest with it, like what would her reaction have been? I've actually had like those conversations with her now, but like when I was first kind of going through this and heard this as a week-long sermon session, it struck me. I mean, to breaking down in tears. I was like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I looked up when the speaker this morning said how many seconds he lived. I totally did the math on my cell phone and looked at how many seconds I lived. It's like 689 million or something. And how many of those seconds did I waste by not being true to who I was, being a Christian and being unashamed? And I was like, probably more than half, which is awful because you got to think probably more than half is just sleeping. And so, but it is just one of those things of like, it's just really conviction to my heart of every day, everything I'm doing, every restaurant I go to, every person I talk to, I need to be upfront and honest with them because I don't know if they've never heard it for the first time. Or if they have, great, then we have something to go off of. But it's just one of those things of where I wanted to share it with you guys. God definitely placed it on my heart specifically, and I was like, they don't want to hear this. They're not going to. This is a new movement, kind of, young Christianity, millennial type idea, living unashamed movement, 116, like. And he was like, no, you're going to say it to him. I was like, whatever, all right. And so, I mean, he was able to tell me 4 pages worth of notes. And so, thank y'all for letting me talk and getting to share this with you guys. It means a lot to me. But yeah. I'll just pray us out if that's okay. God, you're so good. You are the reason that we're all here. Paul, your messenger Paul, is also a direct reason of why we're here. If he didn't go out to the Romans and didn't go out to these unreached areas, Christianity possibly wouldn't have spread the way that it did. And so I want to thank you for Paul. I want to thank you for putting that boldness and that unashamed mentality into his life and his heart. I pray that you place that mentality into our hearts. And it's something that we're reminded of every day. We wake up in the morning and we know that every second we live that day is going to be lived for you and outwardly lived for you, not just inwardly. I just thank you for all the things that you're doing in our life. I pray for all the families that are going through hard times with Rowlett and Garland and just other aspects of the world. I just lift them up to you, God, because when they rely on you, you're going to give them that strength in whatever way and capacity that they need. We love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.